So today we're talking about the Hot Sugars Cold World method for making music and transposing that into filmmaking for commercials. Stay to the end to find out what that means. I'll tell you in the beginning. Welcome to the news. I'll tell you in the beginning what that means is Hot Sugars Cold World is a movie that is based on somebody who makes music, which is a little bit chaotic, which has to do with banging on different pans, pots, for example, different noises coming from different places, and then leveraging sounds coming from all around to make different music. And Hot Sugar is the name of the artist who is in the movie Hot Sugar's Cold World, who in essence performs music. He performs music live, but that's how he produces the music, is by banging on different various frequencies that are related to different objects that correspond to variational sounds that come from various different items and various different things, for lack of a better word, various nouns. He likes to use nouns, things that are nouns, to make sounds, is what I meant to say. And so that is what we're talking about in terms of trying to transpose that mindset into making commercials, basically making commercials, because what we are trying to do is correspond with affiliates, in the short and the long-term sense, so that in essence we're trying to make art but make affiliates and be able to connect peculiar, wild messaging, similar to this podcast. We're just kind of throwing darts at the wall, basically, but not even looking at the wall necessarily. At the same time, we're not looking at the target, we're not looking at anything like that as we make this podcast. So it's similar to that. That's what we're trying to do, but in a visual sense, in a visual format, where we want to make sound expressions, basically sound filmmaking. We're making sound expressions based off of these banging and thuds and peculiar weird noises that we find from weird different places that correspond to the infinity and the eternity of the universe, and find different consistent sounds, sound sources that make all kinds of the weirdest, funkiest, most avant-garde sounds, to then be able to actually make films with these sounds to correspond to basically commercials for different affiliate lists in an ideal sense that correspond to peculiar resonance, which has to do with an energy source, such as myself. For example, because Dinky Tech and Change for Game Studios and this podcast comes from myself. So at the same time, we're trying to get residual sounds to reverberate from me, I guess, to different music making, to make different music, different avant-garde music, for example, and then reverberate that into commercials. So we're actually trying to do sound filmmaking, sound iteration filmmaking, sound frequency generation of various iterations of splatter, kind of, in terms of generation of imagery, and just peculiar ways to try to run it together, not so that it's chaotic, but that it's fluid with the energy that corresponds to who I am as a person and what the brand is meant to be, but at the same time, as chaotic as this podcast is, basically, which isn't 100% chaotic, because every day we try to have a message, we try to have some continuity, we try to have some value attached to it that corresponds to the potential in the business world. But then there's the spirituality side, which corresponds to infinity. So we're trying to combine the two, practicality and value, and the essence of infinity at the same time. So we're trying to dig into infinity by leveraging sound. Sound is corresponded to infinity. It's infinite sound waves, kind of, that just are on a magnitude scale of micro and macro representations in the form of sounds. So when we use that methodology to create imagery, and not just to create imagery, but to create stories and narratives which correspond to selling interesting stories and narratives, which are supposed to be fetching similar to a music video, but we're actually leveraging those as commercials for different lists, which are different stores, that basically we're just trying to reiterate and but also sort of exemplify or repurpose the essence of art to begin with. Because in essence, even a movie is selling something, it's selling itself. But nonetheless, as we're trying to sell with the essence of art and the medium of filmmaking, in essence, we want to incorporate and tie in the products into the movies, but at the same time develop purposes, develop long-term philanthropy energy, and develop the idea of focusing on leading by example in terms of the potential of grander scale macro problem-solving solutions, leading by example type of imagery that we're able to produce in our filmmaking style through the essence of sonic development. Sonic development, similar to hot sugars, cold world, by just finding resonance, finding peculiar resonance, finding collaborations, finding collaborative source energy from different people to make, sounds from their breath or whatever it is, to get the source energy from good places, so that these source energies have the ability to kind of pre-cell themselves in small sound waves to be able to exemplify themselves and scale themselves into a global good deeds economy, into a larger scalable energy, like just a larger philanthropy energy generation mechanism that corresponds to a new way of making commercials. Because it's not as though this podcast doesn't care. It's not as though this podcast doesn't give an F, because in a certain sense it does not give an F. That is what the whole purpose of this podcast is about, and that's the purpose of this filmmaking that I'm talking about too. We want to go with random, we want to go with avant-garde, we want to go with peculiar, strange, very weird sounds to begin with, very weird sounds that were overlapping on top of each other, that don't belong with each other, and then iterating and making a film from that, to correspond to different lists, which correspond to different conceptual stores, and all of those stores that correspond to those lists, which is on a specific website, which I'm still not able to talk about right now, but all these lists that correspond to different stores correspond to different personalities, which correspond to different niches, which corresponds to the ability to make various and varying different sounds and stories and depictions and brands, basically, and brands for each of these different stores and lists. And as we try to create these different brands and lists and stores and lists that are separate from different titles, that have also, a way of being able to be generated quickly because they're just lists, but we can personify them into specific stores that serve a specific purpose, just like every single store in a mall, for example. They all have a specific purpose and speak to a specific part of that larger crowd that's walking through the mall. And so that is the nature of it, is to almost even be able to create the store by developing these sounds, and therefore also these films, and then therefore the stores after that, because we can leverage the products that can match the stories, that can match the weirdness of the content that we already have, which corresponds to the commercial, that corresponds to the list, that corresponds to the store, that corresponds to the interest of developing consistent stores similar to a mall, like developing a digital mall that's made from art, developing a digital mall that's made from art and music videos and peculiar sounds, similar to the movie Hot Sugar's Cold World, and similar to the process of that methodology of making sounds and trying to explore the universe for different infinite sounds and sound-making processes, to be able to try to ping and ring and zing different frequencies off of different materials to get different returns and surface reverberations in the form of frequencies, to be able to try to continue to reverberate our business across the world, across the globe, so that we can continue to reverberate the global philanthropy energy grid and the global good deeds economy, so that we can try to generate philanthropy energy and enhance the world by developing more positive reverberation and more optimization among humanity in terms of how to connect with each other in using the form of business and business music to try to harmonize among one another. And that's about all for now. Let's also remember to push for world peace. Let's remember in conclusion of this podcast to push for world peace. Let's push for world peace. Push for world peace. Every single day that we are alive, we must push for world peace, so that every person in the world gets treated equally and has similar services, similar access to similar abilities to travel all around the world with each other every single day and live harmoniously among the planet in an ideal sense. And in addition, I'll just at least sign off and say that's all for now. Thanks again, Digitech Change for Game Studios. Bye, peace, bye. And then I'll also say, oh yeah, let's also remember to clear the animal shelters. Let's clear the animal shelters, because all the animal shelters must be cleared so that we can hire all the shelter animals as healers throughout our community so we can give all the shelter animals jobs to be hired as healers throughout our communities. And let's also foster all the shelter animals to clear the animal shelters. And let's also adopt all the shelter animals to clear the animal shelters so that we can immediately and imminently clear the animal shelters. Because we can also rescue the animals from the animal shelters, because we can hire the shelter animals as healers. And they should be hired as healers throughout our community so that they have jobs and they have a place and they work for free. And at the same time, they're very grateful just to stay alive and be spending time with humans for the most part. So let's clear the animal shelters, Yay! Yes! That's all for now. Thanks again, Digitech Change for Game Studios. Bye, peace, bye, yeah!